In Veridia, rain didn't just fall, it attacked. Cold, heavy drops lashed against the car windows, joining the chaotic symphony of blaring horns and the bleeding neon of a city that never slept. Elara Vance clutched the worn strap of her leather portfolio, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Tonight's meeting could change everything. A private, anonymous art collector, communicating only through emails signed Mr. Nightingale, was interested in hiring her to restore an 1/8th century oil painting. More importantly, the fee they offered was enough to cover the entire cost of the complex heart surgery for Leo, her younger brother. Just the thought of it made her throat tighten. Damn it, she muttered, glancing at her phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The V-Ride app announced, "Your driver is here." She looked up, squinting through the thick curtain of rain. Just as described, a sleek black sedan was idling at the curb, its engine a low, confident purr. The windows were tinted so darkly she couldn't see a thing inside. Not wasting another second, she yanked open the rear door and practically fell in, bringing a gust of cold air and the damp smell of rain with her. She wrestled her umbrella closed, dripping water onto a plush floor mat. Sorry for the delay, she gasped, trying to push soaked strands of dark brown hair from her face. I'm so sorry, the rain is awful. The Celadon building, corner of Elm and 4th. As fast as you can, please. I'm already late. The car's interior was strangely silent. The quiet so absolute it seemed to swallow her words. There was no repetitive pop music, no cheap pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror. Instead, the subtle scent of expensive leather and a dark, sophisticated cologne sandalwood and something sharper, like gunpowder, filled the air. The seat was so soft it nearly consumed her, a world away from the usual service cars she took. She glanced at the driver's seat. The man wore a perfectly tailored suit, his broad shoulders filling the frame. She couldn't see his face, but when she looked in the rearview mirror, she met his eyes, and she forgot how to breathe. They were gray, as cold and sharp as steel forged in ice. They were focused and ruthless, pinning her to her seat. These were not the eyes of a normal rideshare driver trying to finish a fare in the rain. These were the eyes of a predator. Dante Volkov, known to the entire Veridian underworld as the Sovereign, was about to speak, his cold voice ready to eject this uninvited guest from his private sanctuary. But just then, a pair of headlights flashed in his rearview mirror, followed by a black, unlicensed SUV. The Rattlers, Silas Kane's vultures. They'd been tailing him all week, like a pack of starving dogs, searching for a weakness, an opening, an idea, as ruthless and efficient as a blade, formed in Dante's mind. This girl, with her ordinary appearance, her rain-mussed hair, and the genuine panic in her eyes, was the perfect camouflage. A woman in his car would make the Rattlers hesitate, speculate. A new lover, a business associate, an innocent civilian, their hesitation would buy him the time he needed. The Celadon building, he said, his voice a low, steady baritone, devoid of any emotion. The car pulled away from the curb, moving through the night as smoothly and silently as a ghost. A chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothes traced its way down Elara's spine. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. This man radiated a dangerous energy, a controlled stillness that made the air in the car feel thick and heavy. She glanced at his hands on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. They were long and powerful, and a faint, white scar ran across his right hand, from his knuckles to his wrist. The journey was only 10 minutes, but for Elara, it felt like an eternity of silent torture. Finally, Dante stopped the car a block away from the Celadon building, pulling into the deep shadow of an old oak tree where the streetlights couldn't reach. "This is fine," he said, his voice unchanged, his eyes still fixed on the rearview mirror, where the Rattler's SUV had slowed, watching from a distance. "Oh, right, thank you," Elara stammered, fumbling in her bag for her wallet. "How much is the—" "It's free," he cut her off, the finality in his tone permitting no argument. "Go." It was not a suggestion, it was a command. Elara didn't dare ask another question. She grabbed her umbrella and nearly tumbled out of the car, scrambling into the cold rain. She ran for the lights of the Celadon building without looking back. It was only when she was standing safely under the awning, breathless and her heart pounding, that she realized it. Her hand, which should have been clutching her portfolio, was empty. She had left the most important object in her life on the back seat of that strange, terrifying car. Inside was not just her work, but her ID, and worse, the entire detailed medical file for Leo. In the armored sedan, now disappearing into traffic, Dante gestured for his actual driver, Marco, who sat in the passenger seat. Once they were safely in the shadows of another alley, Dante reached into the back and picked up the worn leather case. He opened it, a rare flicker of curiosity overriding his usual caution. Inside were charcoal drawings, vibrant with life, capturing the streets of Veridia and portraits that seemed to hold the subject's very soul. He could see the talent in every line, and then he saw it, a medical file, complex congenital heart disease, coronary artery bypass graft, estimated surgical cost, patient name, Leo Vance. Guardian. Elara Vance. He picked up her ID. In the photo, her hazel eyes stared directly at him, defiant and resilient despite a forced, polite smile. Dante felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he had buried long ago under layers of power and cruelty. He didn't know that, across the street, a man was lowering a pair of binoculars. Having watched Elara's panicked exit, he pulled out a phone. "Tell Kane. The Sovereign has a new woman. Looks important." She came running from his car looking terrified. Find out everything about her. The chance encounter hadn't just pulled Elara into Dante's world. It had painted a massive, bloody target on her back. Of course, here is Chapter 2, rewritten in English. Dawn in Veridia didn't bring warmth. It merely replaced the black of night with a cold, unforgiving gray. Weak morning light struggled to penetrate the thick, bulletproof glass of the penthouse, casting faint stripes across the polished black marble floor. The silence was absolute, broken only by the clink of an ice cube against glass as Dante Volkov swirled the water in his tumbler. He hadn't slept. The image of defiant hazel eyes in the ID photo and the cold clinical diagnosis in Leo Vance's medical file had replayed in his mind all night. They were unforeseen variables, messy, human pieces in his carefully controlled world. Marco entered the room, his long stride silent on the Persian rug. He placed a tablet on Dante's obsidian desk, his expression, as always, serious. "The Rattlers had a tail on the girl all night, Dante," Marco said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "They have her name, address, place of work. Silas Kane is a viper. He won't hesitate to use a civilian to get to you." Dante didn't look up, but Marco knew he was listening. "She is not my concern." "But they think she is," Marco insisted. "And in our world, what the enemy believes is as dangerous as the truth." He swiped a finger across the tablet, displaying a series of photos. They were long-lens shots of Elara walking to the hospital, her face weary under the streetlights, sitting alone in a small cafe, her expression worried. She looked small and terribly out of place in their ruthless city. Her name is Elara Vance, art restorer, orphaned at 18, raised her brother on her own. She's struggling to pay for his surgery. She's clean, Dante. She doesn't belong in this. Dante finally looked up, his gray eyes as cold as a winter sky. "That's precisely why she's the perfect target. Kane knows I would never put my own family in the line of fire. But a stranger? He's testing me. He thinks I'll let her die to protect my empire." "And will you?" Marco asked, a rare hint of challenge in his voice. He was the only man alive who could question the Sovereign. Dante was silent for a long moment. He hated complications. He hated loose ends. Elara Vance was a loose end, but something in her resilience, in the fierce, unconditional love for her brother that was evident even in dry medical records, had touched a part of him he thought long dead. A strange, heavy sense of responsibility settled over him. He had dragged her into this mess. He would be the one to get her out. "Learn everything about her," Dante commanded, his voice returning to its usual icy authority. "Her schedule, habits, friends. I want our people watching her 24/7. But stay back. I don't want her to know she's being watched by us." "Understood," Marco replied. He hesitated. "And Kane, let the snake make its move," Dante said, a dangerous light glinting in his eyes. "Let's see how far it's willing to strike." Meanwhile, Elara was living through the worst day of her life. She woke up on her lumpy sofa with a pounding headache, the memory of the luxury car and the terrifying man still vivid. The first thing she did was check her email, praying for a follow-up from Mr. Nightingale. There was a new message from him. Her heart leaped, but as she read it, her hopes shattered. "Is greater than Miss Vance, is greater than. After careful consideration, I regret to inform you that we have decided to move in a different direction with the restoration project. Thank you for your time. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." It was short, cold, impersonal. Her best hope, extinguished in a few sterile sentences. Worse, the unnerving feeling of being watched from the night before had not disappeared. It was a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the flicker of a shadow at the edge of her vision as she walked down the street. She told herself it was just paranoia, brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But the feeling clung to her like a cold fog on her way to the hospital to visit Leo. And as she sat by his bedside, forcing a bright smile she didn't feel. That evening, exhausted and defeated, Elara returned to her small art studio, a dusty loft in a rundown industrial block that she rented for cheap. It was her sanctuary, the one place she could escape the world. But as she reached the top of the stairs, she saw that her heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. Her heart seized. She never forgot to lock it. She pushed the door open cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. The inside was a scene of total violation. The familiar, comforting smell of oil, paint, and turpentine was gone, replaced by the stench of destruction. Cans of paint had been thrown against her works in progress, defiling the history she worked so hard to preserve. Easels were overturned. Canvases had been slashed with a cruel, vicious knife, but nothing was stolen. Her expensive tools were all still there. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. Her breath caught in her throat. On the one remaining clean brick wall, Someone had used a can of garish red spray paint to scrawl a message, the letters dripping like blood. Stay away from the Sovereign. The Sovereign. Ice-cold terror flooded Elara's veins, making her knees weak. She'd heard the name whispered in the dark corners of Veridia, a fearsome legend, a monster who controlled the city from the shadows. What did he have to do with her? And then she remembered. The luxury car, the man with the steel-gray eyes, the aura of lethal danger. Oh God. She had taken a ride with the Sovereign. Just then, her cheap cell phone rang in her jacket pocket, the sound shrill and jarring in the dead silence. A blocked number. She hesitated for a second, then answered with a trembling hand. Hello? Miss Vance? A deep, familiar voice spoke, calm, controlled, and cold. The same voice that had haunted her all day. It made the hair on her arms stand on end. Who is this? She whispered, backing away until her shoulders hit the cold brick wall, her eyes still fixed on the red letters. The man whose car you got into last night. Dante's voice came through the line, devoid of emotion. I think we need to talk. Look out your window. Timidly, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest, Elara walked to the filthy window and peered down into the dark alley below. The black sedan was parked there, silent and imposing, a predator waiting in the shadows. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but it broke at the end. Silas Kane and his rattlers think you are my lover, Dante said bluntly without preamble. What happened to your studio was a beginning. They will not stop until they get to me, and they believe the fastest way is through you. You and your brother are in danger, Elara, deadly danger, and it is my fault. For the first time, she heard a flicker of something in his voice, not remorse, but a cold, hard admission of responsibility. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling with fear and anger. For you to be safe. I'm downstairs. Open the door. We need to talk, face to face. I promise you, I will not harm you. Elara looked around her ruined studio, her sanctuary, now violated. She thought of Leo, lying in the hospital, vulnerable and defenseless. She had no choice. She was caught in a monster's web, and now another monster was offering her the only way out. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she walked to the door and opened it. Of course. Here is Chapter 3, rewritten in English. Dante Volkov stood in the doorway, a tall, dark silhouette that filled the frame. He'd shed his overcoat and wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that did nothing to hide the breadth of his shoulders or his powerful build. The chill of the Veridian night seemed to cling to him, seeping into the small studio and chasing away the stale air of vandalism. His gray eyes swept dispassionately over the ruined studio before landing on Elara's pale face, his gaze as sharp and clinical as a scalpel. May we come in? His voice wasn't a question. It was a statement. Elara took an involuntary step back, her body reacting with the primal instinct of prey before a predator. She said nothing, which he took as consent. He moved past her, his presence immediately making the small room feel suffocating. He didn't waste a glance on the destroyed artwork, instead fixing his penetrating stare on her, as if he were analyzing every fractured piece of her soul. I have your portfolio, he said, placing it on the one small table that was still upright. He then set another case beside it, a sleek, modern, metallic briefcase. He opened it with a clean, sharp click. Inside were neat stacks of crisp, new $100 bills. A lot of them. Elara stared at the money, then back at his impassive face. What is that? $100,000, Dante said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. A down payment. I read your brother's file. I know you need this for his surgery. A hot, furious anger surged through Elara, eclipsing the fear that had been paralyzing her. Who did he think he was? God? Tearing her life apart and then trying to patch it up with money? I don't want your money, she seethed, her voice trembling with rage. I want you and your goddamn enemies out of my life. It's too late for that, Dante replied, his voice as cold as ice. He took a step closer. Silas Kane has marked you. He will not stop. He will use you, and he will use your brother, to force my hand. He believes you are my weakness. But I don't even know you, she yelled, desperation making her voice crack. I got into the wrong car. That doesn't matter to a man like Kane. Dante was very close now. Elara wanted to retreat, but her back was already against an overturned easel. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body and the subtle scent of sandalwood and danger. I am here to offer you a deal, an agreement. I don't want anything from you. You'll want to hear this, he persisted, his low voice almost hypnotic. I will cover all of Leo's medical expenses, the surgery, the aftercare, the medication, everything. I will ensure he has the best doctors in this country. He will have a future. Elara stared at him, skeptical and wary. Her heart ached at the mention of Leo. Why? Why would you do that? Because this is my fault, he admitted, a flicker of reluctance crossing his hard, sculpted features. My carelessness put you in this position. It is my responsibility to fix it. He paused, his gaze deepening, becoming more intense. In return, you will do something for me. What? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. You will come and live with me, in my penthouse. It is the safest place in Veridia, an impenetrable fortress. You will stay there, under my protection, until I have eliminated the threat of Silas Kane. No one, not even a fly, will be able to touch you there. Elara let out a laugh, a bitter, hopeless sound that echoed in the ruined room. Are you kidding me? You want me to be your prisoner? To give up my life, my freedom, to live in a gilded cage because of your mistake? I want you to live, Dante corrected, his voice hardening, losing its dispassionate edge. Out there, you are prey. With me, you will be safe. This is not a request, Elara. This is your only choice. Your brother's life and your own safety, in exchange for a little of your time. The standoff hung in the silence, punctuated only by the now distant sound of the rain. Elara looked into Dante's unwavering eyes. He was a monster, a crime lord, a man every citizen of Veridia feared. But his words held a brutal truth she couldn't deny. Her ruined studio was proof. She had no money, no power, no one to protect her. She was alone, with a brother who needed her more than ever. The image of Leo, his face pale, his smile weak, squeezed her heart. She could be stubborn, she could fight, but she could not gamble with Leo's life. Tears began to trace paths down her cheeks. They were tears of defeat, of fear, and of a painful, desperate sliver of hope for Leo's future. If I agree, she said, her voice barely a whisper, will my brother really be safe? I swear it on my life, Dante said, and somehow, she believed him. A vow from a man like him carried more weight than gold. He will be moved to the best private hospital in the city tomorrow morning, with my security team guarding him 24/7. Her breath hitched in a sob. All right, she said, the word tearing from her throat. I'll do it. Dante didn't look pleased or victorious. His expression remained unchanged, as if this were merely a business transaction being finalized. He gave a single, decisive nod. Good. Marco is waiting outside. He will escort you to gather what you need. Essentials only. We leave in an hour. As he turned to walk out the door, Elara spoke, her voice regaining a sliver of its strength. Volkov. He stopped, half turning, his silhouette blocking the light from the hallway. I am doing this for my brother, she said, her eyes blazing through her tears. Don't you ever, for 1 second, think I am doing this for you. To me, you are still the monster who destroyed my life. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Dante's lips. It was cold and held no humor. I never claimed to be anything else, Elara. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with the briefcase full of money, her own battered portfolio, and the stark reality of the deal she had just made. She had sold her freedom to save her brother, and now, she belonged to the sovereign. Of course, here is the detailed chapter 4, written in English as requested. Dante Volkov's penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress of glass and steel perched atop the world, looking down on Veridia like an arrogant god. Everything was minimalist, precise, and cold. Black marble floors bled into charcoal gray leather furniture, and vast floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering cityscape that felt 1,000,000 miles away. There were no photographs, no sentimental clutter, no sign of a life lived with warmth. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and profoundly empty. Elara was given a guest suite that was more luxurious than any hotel she had ever seen, with a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud and a bathroom carved from a single piece of white marble. But the opulence only made her feel more trapped. The windows were made of the same thick, bulletproof glass as the rest of the apartment, and the only exit was silently guarded by men in black suits who moved like shadows. For the first day, she stayed in her room, pacing like a caged animal. On the second day, her restlessness and stubborn spirit took over. She couldn't just sit and wait. She had to do something. She left the suite and began to explore her prison. She found Dante in a vast room he called his library. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, this room had a hint of warmth. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, filled with leather-bound books that smelled of age and knowledge. But her attention was caught by something else. In the center of the room, on a heavy wooden easel, stood a large oil painting covered by a white cloth. Dante stood with his back to her, staring out the window at the city below, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered. You shouldn't wander, he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to be absorbed by the books around them. Last I checked, the deal was for guest, not prisoner, she retorted, her voice sharper than she intended. Besides, there's nowhere for me to go. She nodded toward the easel. What's that? Dante was silent for a moment before answering. Something broken that needs to be fixed. He walked over to the easel and pulled away the cloth. Underneath was a breathtaking landscape painting, but it was severely damaged. A long, ugly slash ran diagonally across the canvas, a violent scar. Large patches of paint were peeling, and the entire piece was dulled by a thick layer of grime. The painting depicted a wild coastline at sunset, the colors once vibrant, the brush strokes full of passion and emotion. Despite the damage, Elara could see the extraordinary talent of the artist. "It's beautiful," she whispered, stepping closer to examine it, her professional instincts taking over. "It was," Dante corrected, his voice flat. "I want you to restore it." Elara looked at him, surprised. "You want me? To work for you?" "I want you occupied," he stated coldly. "An idle mind is a dangerous thing. Yours seems particularly restless." He gestured to the painting. "You're a restorer. Restore it." The offer was a lifeline, a purpose, a way to feel like herself again, and not just a possession. It was a piece of her old life in this strange, terrifying new one. She ran a gentle finger over a corner of the canvas, feeling the texture of the old paint. The canvas is torn, not just slashed. It will need to be relined. The grime is heavy, but the original colors seem to be well preserved underneath. The artist was brilliant. The way he captured the light on the water. She trailed off, lost in the work for a moment. "Can you fix it?" Dante's question cut through her professional analysis. She looked from the painting to his steel-gray eyes. For the first time, she felt a flicker of power in their dynamic. This was her world, her expertise. "Yes," she said with confidence. "I can make it look like it was never damaged. But I'll need my tools. Proper solvents, conservation-grade varnish, linen canvas for the lining, pigments. A list of everything you need will be on the kitchen counter in the morning," he interrupted. "Marco will procure it for you. Your studio was compromised. Consider this your new one." He looked at the painting, and for a split second, the cold mask on his face cracked. Elara saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, a deep, ancient pain. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I expect perfection, Miss Vance," he said, his voice returning to its usual cold command. Elara met his gaze, lifting her chin in defiance. "You'll get it," she promised. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and left the library, leaving her alone with the broken masterpiece. She stood before the canvas for a long time, the silence of the gilded cage pressing in on her. She had a purpose now, a mystery to unravel, both on the canvas and in the man who had imprisoned her. As she looked at the violent slash that had destroyed the beautiful sunset, she couldn't help but wonder if it was a reflection of the man who owned it, something magnificent that had been brutally broken long ago. Of course, here is Chapter 5, rewritten in English. The days that followed settled into a strange, tense routine. The penthouse operated on an invisible, precise schedule, a world unto itself. Elara had claimed her corner of the library, and the scent of turpentine and old oil paint began to subtly permeate the air, a quiet rebellion against the sterile perfection of her gilded cage. Restoring the painting became her anchor. Under her patient, methodical hands, the original, vibrant colors of the sunset began to emerge from beneath decades of grime. She lost herself in the work for hours at a time, the meticulous process a balm for her frayed nerves. Dante left her to it. He was a silent presence in the penthouse, often disappearing into his office for hours, but she always felt his awareness of her, a constant, low-level hum in the background of her thoughts. They were two planets in a silent orbit, held together by a gravity of circumstance. The fragile peace was shattered on a Thursday evening. Elara was carefully cleaning a section of the sky when her phone, resting on a nearby table, buzzed violently. It was the private number for the nurse's station on Leo's floor. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Elara Vance speaking," she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "Miss Vance, this is Nurse Chambers," a rushed, professional voice said on the other end. "There's been a complication. Leo is experiencing a severe arrhythmia. His breathing is unstable. The doctor is with him now, but you should come to the hospital immediately." The world dissolved into a roaring sound in Elara's ears. Complication. Unstable. The clinical words were daggers. She dropped her cotton swab, her only thought a primal, desperate need to get to her brother. She bolted from the library, sprinting towards the main door of the penthouse, not even thinking about the guards or the fact that she was a prisoner. A solid form blocked her path. Dante. He stood before the elevator, his body an immovable wall, his face calm and questioning. "Get out of my way," she gasped, trying to push past him, her hands beating uselessly against his chest. "I have to go. It's Leo." "I heard," he said, his voice a steady grounding force in her storm of panic. He easily caught her wrists, his grip firm but not painful, and panicking will not help him. "Tell me exactly what the nurse said." "She said there was a complication, an arrhythmia. I don't know. I have to be there," she cried, tears of terror and frustration streaming down her face. He looked down at her, his gray eyes clear and focused. "Which doctor is on duty?" "Dr. Peterson, I think." Dante's expression tightened. "He's a resident. Not good enough." He released one of her wrists, pulled out his own phone, and dialed a number with swift efficiency. He didn't raise his voice, but its tone became something else entirely cold, absolute, and laced with the kind of power that did not allow for refusal. "This is Volkov," he said into the phone. "I need Dr. Alistair Reed at Veridia General. Not his fellow, not his resident. Him. I don't care if he's in the middle of surgery. The hospital's pediatric cardiac wing is about to receive a new, permanent endowment. That endowment disappears if Reed is not at my brother-in-law's bedside in the next 20 minutes. He paused. Yes, you heard me. 20 minutes. He hung up. My brother-in-law. The words stunned Elara into silence. He turned back to her, his face once again an unreadable mask. Marco is bringing the car around. We'll be there in 10. The ride to the hospital was a blur of silent tension. Elara was torn between her all-consuming fear for Leo and a sense of dizzying disbelief. The monster she despised had just moved heaven and earth for her brother with a single phone call. She had been fighting for months to scrape together the money for this surgery, while he had commanded the city's top specialist to his side with a casual threat. They waited in the stark, sterile quiet of the private waiting room. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Dante didn't speak. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. He simply sat beside her, a solid, unwavering presence in the terrifying stillness. Finally, a man in surgical scrubs entered. He was older, with tired, intelligent eyes. It was Dr. Reed himself. Miss Vance, he said, his voice calm. Leo is stable. We got to him just in time. The arrhythmia was more severe than the initial readings showed. He then turned his gaze to Dante. Mr. Volkov, your call, frankly, it saved the boy's life. A few more minutes of indecision, and we would be having a very different conversation. The relief, when it came, didn't feel like joy. It was a physical blow, a tsunami that shattered the dam of adrenaline and fear that had been holding her together. Her strength evaporated. A wrenching sob tore from her throat, and she collapsed forward, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of her weeping. Dante froze. He was a man who dealt in violence, currency, and power. He understood threats and transactions. This raw, unfiltered wave of emotion was a foreign language. For a long second, he looked utterly lost. Then, hesitantly, awkwardly, he reached out and placed a hand on her trembling shoulder. The gesture was stiff, unfamiliar, but the warmth of his touch was a startling anchor in her chaos. He's safe now, Elara, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't gentle, but it was the most comforting thing she had ever heard. Through her tears, Elara looked up at her captor, and for the first time, she saw past the cold, ruthless armor of the sovereign. She saw a man, impossibly complex and guarded, whose iron facade had just shown its first, undeniable crack. Understood. All subsequent chapters will be written in English. Here is Chapter 6. The library had become Elara's sanctuary. In the quiet, ordered world of Dante Volkov's penthouse, this one room was hers. It smelled of her solvents, her oil paints, and the dusty fragrance of old paper from the books that watched her work. The truce between them was fragile, an unspoken agreement defined by the space she occupied. He never entered when she was working, and she never wandered into his private office. They coexisted in silence, two planets in a cold, lonely orbit. Weeks bled into one another. Under her skilled hands, the painting was reborn. The ugly slash was meticulously mended, the canvas relined and strengthened. The layers of grime had vanished, revealing the artist's original, breathtaking vision. The sunset over the wild coast was no longer muted and sad. It was a symphony of gold, crimson, and deep indigo. It was the final step, applying the protective, satin finish varnish that led her to the discovery. She was working on the bottom right corner, a section of dark, shadowy rocks. The light had to be perfect to ensure an even coat, so she angled her portable lamp, casting a sharp, raking light across the canvas. And then she saw it. Tucked away within the deep umber of a rock shadow, so small it was almost invisible, were a pair of initials, applied with a slightly different pigment, a signature hidden from a casual viewer. A.V. Elara's breath hitched. Her heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a cruel joke played by the universe. Her father's name was Arthur Vance. He signed all his early works with those same simple initials. Her hands trembling, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photo gallery, past pictures of Leo smiling in his hospital bed, until she found what she was looking for, a photo of the one small painting of his she had managed to keep, a simple still life of a pair. She zoomed in on the corner. There it was, the same elegant, slightly curved A, the same sharp, definitive V. The air in the room grew thin. This wasn't just a painting. This was her father's work. This magnificent, broken, and no-healed masterpiece was a piece of him. All the questions she had suppressed for weeks came rushing back, crashing down on her with the force of a tidal wave. How did Dante Volkov, the most feared man in Veridia, come to own a lost painting by her obscure, long-dead father? She didn't wait. Wiping her hands on a rag, she stormed out of the library, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She found him in the main living area, standing before the vast window, a dark silhouette against the glittering city lights. "Where did you get it?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. Dante turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask of calm. "Get what?" "The painting," she said, her voice rising. "Don't play dumb with me, Volkov. Where did you get my father's painting?" She strode towards him and shoved the phone in his face, displaying the two signatures side by side. This was his. "How do you have it?" Dante looked at the phone, then back at her. The surprise on his face was not that she had discovered the signature, but that she was confronting him with such fire. A flicker of something regret, perhaps, passed through his steel-gray eyes. "I was wondering when you'd find that," he said softly. "You have his eye for detail." "Answer me," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound heavy with the weight of years. "That painting did not belong to me, Elara. It belonged to my father, Nikolai Volkov." Elara stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Your father, Arthur Vance, was not just some struggling artist," Dante said, his voice low and intense. He finally looked at her, truly looked at her, and the walls between them seemed to dissolve. "He was my father's closest friend. He was the Volkov family's private artist for years. He painted this for my father as a gift, a view of the coastline where they used to go fishing as young men." The floor seemed to drop out from under Elara's feet. Her mind reeled, trying to process the impossible words. "The stories you were told about your father, about loan sharks. They were lies, told to protect you," Dante continued, his voice laced with a cold, hard bitterness. "Your father didn't get into trouble with criminals, Elara. He got entangled with my rivals, the Canes." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "There was a traitor in my father's organization, someone feeding information to Silas Kane's father. Your father, Arthur, overheard something he wasn't supposed to. He discovered the traitor's identity. He went to warn my father, but he was too late." Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "I was a boy. I saw it happen. The Canes ambushed us. They killed my father right in front of me." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his eyes told a story of unimaginable pain. "And to silence the only witness, they went after your father next. They made it look like a random mugging." Elara collapsed onto the cold leather sofa, a sob escaping her lips. It was all too much. A lifetime of accepted truths had just been shattered into a million pieces. "Before he died," Dante said, his voice barely a whisper, "the last thing my father made me promise was that I would find his friend's family, that I would find you and your brother, and I would protect you." He looked at her, his expression raw and vulnerable for the first time. "I have been searching for you for 15 years, Elara. When you fell into my car that night, and I saw your name on your ID, I thought it was fate. I didn't know how to tell you. How could I explain that the danger you were in was because of a promise I made to my dead father? So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I locked you away to keep you safe." The gilded cage, the forced proximity, the cold commands, it all clicked into place. It wasn't about ownership, it was about protection, a clumsy, misguided, but desperate attempt to fulfill a dying wish. Their connection wasn't an accident, it was a legacy, forged in betrayal and paid for in blood. The man standing before her was no longer just her captor. He was the boy who had watched his father die, the man who carried the weight of a 15-year-old promise. And she was no longer just his prisoner. She was the daughter of the man who had tried to save his father's life. In the silent, opulent penthouse, surrounded by the ghosts of their fathers, Dante and Elara looked at each other as if for the first time. The chasm between them had been bridged by a shared, tragic history, and the truth, as brutal as it was, had bound them together in a way that bars and guards never could. Of course, here is Chapter 7. The truth, once revealed, did not bring peace. Instead, it settled over the penthouse like a heavy, charged atmosphere before a storm. The cold, sterile silence between Dante and Elara was replaced by something far more complex, a shared history. The ghosts of their fathers now walked the halls with them, their tragic alliance binding their children together. The invisible walls in the apartment crumbled. Dante began to talk. In quiet, late-night conversations over glasses of wine in the library, he would share fragments of his father, Nikolai, a man who loved the sea, who had a booming laugh, and who believed loyalty was more valuable than gold. In return, Elara spoke of her father, Arthur, a man who saw the world in colors and light, who could find beauty in the mundane, and whose love for his children was the only legacy he had to leave. They found pieces of their fathers in each other. Dante saw Arthur's resilience and unwavering spirit in Elara's eyes. She saw the lost, grieving boy that was Nikolai's son hidden beneath the cold armor of the sovereign. One evening, he led her up a hidden staircase to a part of the penthouse she never knew existed, a glass-encased rooftop garden. Amidst the concrete jungle of Veridia, it was a secret oasis of green, filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. "My father built this for my mother," Dante said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He said everyone, no matter how powerful, needed a place where things could simply grow. They stood in silence, looking out at the city lights. Elara felt the rigid, controlled posture he always maintained begin to relax. Finding the man who betrayed him, who betrayed both of them. It's all I've thought about for 15 years, he confessed, looking at her. Now, it's not just about revenge for my father. It's about getting justice for yours. And it's about making sure the threat to you is gone. For good. In that moment, under the pale light of the moon, she saw the immense burden he carried. He was not just a king ruling his empire. He was a son trying to honor a promise. Impulsively, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The muscle beneath his suit was tense, hard as stone. You're not alone in it anymore, she whispered. He turned to face her, his gray eyes searching hers. The space between them vanished. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers, tentative at first, then with a deep, consuming passion born not of lust, but of a desperate, profound need for connection. It was a kiss that tasted of shared grief, of quiet understanding, and of a future they might just be able to build from the ashes of their past. Their bond, forged in truth, deepened into a quiet, fierce romance. Elara's presence began to change the penthouse. She brought flowers into the living area. She left books open on the tables. She filled the sterile space with life. For the first time, the gilded cage started to feel like a home. But as their private world softened, Dante's hunt for the traitor intensified. He converted a spare room into a war room, its walls covered in timelines, photographs, and connection charts. He trusted Elara completely now, explaining the inner circle of his father's organization. On the day he was killed, only a handful of people knew my father's exact route, Dante explained one night, pointing to a series of dated photographs. Me, I was just a kid. My father, obviously, and his three most trusted capos. One of them, Antonio, died of a heart attack years ago. That leaves two. Luca, who oversees our tech operations, and Marco. The name hung in the air. Marco, who had been Dante's shadow his entire life. Marco, who was more of a brother than a subordinate. It can't be him, Elara said immediately. Dante, the way he looks at you, that's loyalty. That's family. In my world, the brightest loyalty can cast the darkest shadow, he said grimly, though she could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it either. The first piece of damning evidence arrived a week later. An anonymous tip, sent through encrypted channels, led Dante's men to a safe deposit box. Inside was a ledger containing records of payments from the Kane family, dating back 17 years. The entries were coded, but when Luca's tech team decrypted them, they pointed to a numbered offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Dante's face was stone as he read the report. Find out who owns that account. Now, the investigation took Fort tense hours. More anonymous information trickled in, guiding them, pointing them in a specific direction. It was a trail of digital breadcrumbs, too perfect, too clean. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a shell corporation that owned the account. And the sole director of that corporation, his name on the incorporation documents from 15 years ago, was Marco Moretti. Dante felt the air leave his lungs. It was impossible. A forgery, a frame job. But the documents were authenticated. They found travel records showing Marco had been in the Caymans at the exact time the corporation was founded. They found a subtle transfer of funds from that account to a property developer, the same developer from whom Marco had purchased his mother's house years ago. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of his trust. Marco, his childhood friend. Marco, who had stood by him as he rebuilt his father's empire. Marco, the traitor who had sent his father to his death and watched him grieve for 15 years. That night, Elara found Dante in his office. He hadn't come to bed. He was sitting in the dark, a single photograph in his hand, illuminated by the light from his computer screen. The file with the evidence against Marco was open. The photo was of two boys, no older than 10, with their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning foolishly at the camera. A young Dante and an even younger Marco. He didn't look up as she entered. He just stared at the picture, his face a mask of utter desolation. How could it be him? He whispered to the darkness, the question not meant for her, but for the ghost of the boy in the photograph. How? The shadow of the traitor had fallen, and it threatened to consume the last piece of Dante's faith in the world. Of course, here is Chapter 8. The revelation about Marco plunged the penthouse into a new, colder silence. Dante was a ghost, haunting his own home. He moved through the opulent rooms, his face a mask of stone, but Elara could see the storm of grief and betrayal raging in his eyes. He had put Marco under covert surveillance, delaying the inevitable confrontation, searching for some piece of evidence, any evidence, that would prove the elaborate frame job. But everything his men found only tightened the noose of guilt around his friend's neck. This distraction, this single-minded focus on the enemy within, made him vulnerable. And Silas Kane, a predator who thrived on weakness, chose that exact moment to strike. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Elara was in the library, trying to lose herself in the steady, calming work of varnishing the restored painting, when Dante stormed in, his face pale, his usual iron control shattered. "What is it?" she asked. rising to her feet. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He simply held out his phone. On the screen was a text message from the head of his security team at the hospital. Compromised. Leo is gone. The world tilted on its axis. Elara's legs gave out and she collapsed onto a chair, a strangled cry escaping her lips. The one thing he had sworn to protect, the reason for this entire terrible bargain, gone. Dante's promise had been broken. Her brother was in the hands of monsters. Dante's guilt was a palpable force in the room. "This is my fault," he rasped, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I was so focused on Marco. I didn't see Kane coming. They didn't have to wait long." An hour later, a disposable phone, left by one of Kane's men in the building's lobby, began to ring. Dante answered, putting it on speaker. "Volkov," came the smug, sneering voice of Silas Kane. "I hear you've misplaced something. Or should I say, someone. If you touch him, Kane." Dante's voice was lethally low. "Oh, the boy is fine. For now," Kane laughed. A video file appeared on the phone's screen. Kane played it. It was Leo, pale and terrified, tied to a chair in a dark, grimy room. He was alive. "Here's the deal, Sovereign. You want the boy back? You give me what my father always wanted. The Volkov shipping territories. All of them. Public transfer of all deeds and contracts. You will sign your empire over to me." Elara gasped. The shipping territories were the heart of the Arcadian Syndicate, the source of their power and wealth. Giving them up wasn't just a loss. It was a complete surrender. "The Veridia Central Pier," Kane continued. "Tomorrow at noon. You come alone with the signed papers. My men will be everywhere. You try anything, the boy dies. A king trades his kingdom for his family, doesn't he? Let's see what kind of king you are." The line went dead. Dante stared at the phone, his hands clenched into fists. Elara saw the decision in his eyes. He was going to do it. He would burn his entire empire to the ground to honor his promise to her. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Dante looked at her, his expression grim. "Elara, I have to." "No, you don't," she insisted, walking toward him, her fear forging itself into a sharp, clear resolve. "This isn't just about the territories. He's not just trying to beat you, Dante. He's trying to break you, to humiliate you. It's a trap. You go there, alone, and he'll take your empire and kill you both." "I have no choice," he roared, the sound echoing his desperation. "Yes, we do," she said, her mind racing. "We have to be smarter." Frantic, her thoughts scattered by terror, she stumbled away from him, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for an answer. Her gaze fell upon the other paintings hanging in the library, the ones her father had painted for Nikolai Volkov. They were mostly landscapes of the city, scenes of Veridia from a time before the glass towers had scraped the sky. Her father had always told her he loved to hide things in his art. "Every painting tells more than one story, Ellie Bean," he used to say. One painting in particular drew her in. It was a moody, atmospheric depiction of the old industrial port, the very place Kane wanted to meet. She grabbed Dante's desk lamp, her hands shaking, and held it close to the canvas. She examined every detail, the ships, the water, the warehouses lining the docks. It was all there. Central Pier was prominent in the foreground. It looked perfect, too perfect. Then she saw it. In the reflection on the dark, murky water, the image was slightly distorted. The grand sign for Veridia Central Pier was there, but behind it, almost like a ghost in the water's ripple, was another image. It was the faint, faded logo of a different building, one that wasn't actually visible in the main painting. It was the stylized bull's head of the old Union Tannery, and the reflection of a street sign next to it didn't say Pier Avenue. The letters were warped, but she could make them out. Artisan Way. Her breath caught in her throat. "The old tannery building," she whispered, turning to Dante, her eyes wide with discovery. "On Artisan Way, in the abandoned arts district, a mile north of the pier, my father. He had his first real studio there, years ago, before he ever met your father." Dante stared at her, his expression shifting from grim resolve to intense focus. "What are you saying?" "It's a message," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He must have painted this for your father, and put a secret in it, like a private joke between them. The tannery, it's an old abandoned art warehouse. It's isolated. It's the perfect place for an ambush. The pier is a decoy, Dante. He's not going to be there. He's going to be at the tannery." He strode over to the painting, examining the reflection she pointed out. He saw the faint logo, the warped letters. It was a long shot, a guess based on a ghost in a 15-year-old painting, but it was better than walking into a public execution. He looked at Elara, at the fierce intelligence burning in her tear-filled eyes. She wasn't just a victim in this fight anymore. She was a warrior. He had been trying to solve this with brute force and strategy, but she had solved it with art and with love. He made a decision. He would trust her. He turned from the painting, his despair replaced by a cold, deadly rage. He picked up his own phone and dialed a number. "Get the team ready," he commanded, his voice like ice. "Full tactical gear. We're not going to the pier." He looked at Elara, a new respect and a fierce protective love blazing in his eyes. "We're going to the old tannery." He disconnected the call and looked out at the dark city. "Silas Kane wants a war," Dante said, his voice deadly calm. "Tonight, he gets one. Of course." Here is Chapter 9. The abandoned arts district was a graveyard of forgotten ambitions. Rain slicked the cobblestone streets, reflecting the skeletal remains of warehouses and rusting signs. Dante's convoy of black, armored SUVs moved through the desolation like a funeral procession, silent and deadly. Inside the lead vehicle, the tension was a living thing. Elara sat beside Dante, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her resolve was like steel. Dante was no longer the conflicted man from his office. He was the sovereign, his face carved from ice, his gray eyes burning with a cold, controlled fury. "You stay in the car," he commanded as they pulled to a stop in the shadow of the colossal, decaying tannery. "No matter what you hear, Marco will be here in a minute to guard the vehicle. I left him out of the initial briefing, but I told him where to meet us. He is to get you and Leo out if things go wrong." The mention of Marco was a test and a concession. He still didn't fully trust him, but he trusted his skill. Before Elara could argue, he was gone, melting into the darkness with a team of 6 men, all armed, and moving with the fluid grace of predators. Elara's heart pounded against her ribs. She watched them slip through a side entrance, and then the world erupted. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of automatic gunfire that ripped through the night. Muzzle flashes strobed through the grimy windows of the warehouse, painting the rain-streaked darkness in brief, violent bursts of light. Inside, chaos reigned. Silas Kane had been waiting, his men positioned throughout the cavernous main floor, using old sculpting armatures and stacks of rotting canvases for cover. But he had expected Dante to come through the front, predictable and arrogant. Dante's team, entering from the side and rear, had the element of surprise. The firefight was brutal and close quarters. Concrete chips exploded from pillars as bullets found their mark. The air grew thick with the smell of cordite and damp decay. Dante moved through the fray with a lethal efficiency, a phantom dispensing death with 2 pistols. It was during the height of the battle that Marco's SUV screeched to a halt behind Dante's. But he didn't stay put. A gut feeling, a lifetime of knowing Dante told him this was more than a standard raid. He found Luca, the tech capo, stationed near the back of the convoy, supposedly coordinating communications. He was barking into his comms, but something was wrong. His eyes were wild, and he was focused on a secondary, private channel on his tablet. "Dante's flanking left. They have 2 men pinned down in the east corridor," Luca was shouting. Marco's blood ran cold. That wasn't their comms channel. He was listening to Kane's. In one swift motion, Marco drew his weapon and pressed it to the back of Luca's head. "Who are you talking to, Luca?" Marco's voice was dangerously quiet. Luca froze. "Just coordinating our guys." "Liar." Marco ripped the tablet from his hands. He saw the open channel to Kane's network, the offshore accounts, the anonymous tips that had framed him. It all slammed into place. "It was you. All this time, it was you." Luca's face contorted in a snarl of jealousy and rage. "He never saw me. It was always you, the golden boy. I deserve to be at his right hand, not you." The gunshot was a single, sharp crack that was almost lost in the greater battle. Justice, for 2 fathers, was served. Meanwhile, Dante had fought his way to a partitioned office on the far side of the warehouse. He kicked the door in and found his nightmare realized. Silas Kane was there, and he had Leo, a knife held to the boy's throat. And to Dante's horror, another of Kane's men was dragging a struggling Elara into the room, having pulled her from the car in the initial chaos. "The sovereign," Kane grinned, his face slick with sweat. "You brought the party to me, and your little artist solved the puzzle. Clever girl." He pressed the knife closer to Leo's neck. "Drop your weapons, or the boy dies, and she's next." Dante let his pistols clatter to the floor. His men were still engaged outside. In here, he was alone. Elara's mind raced, adrenaline singing through her veins. She looked around the cramped office, her eyes darting over the cluttered shelves. They were filled with old art supplies, dried pigments, jars of binder, and several large, rusty cans of turpentine. An idea, desperate and dangerous, took root. "You've lost, Kane," Dante said, his voice a low growl trying to keep Silas's attention focused on him. "My men are cutting through yours like paper. I only need to kill you," Kane spat, "and your family." That was the opening Elara needed. While Kane's eyes were locked on Dante, she slammed her body weight backwards, knocking the man holding her off balance. In the same motion, she swung her arm out, sweeping the entire shelf of art supplies to the floor. Jars shattered, cans of turpentine burst open, the flammable liquid splashing across the dusty concrete floor and over Kane's boots. With a desperate lunge, she grabbed a heavy, old-fashioned desk lamp and hurled it to the ground. The bulb shattered, a live wire sparked on the solvent-soaked floor, and the room erupted in a whoosh of blue flame. The fire spread instantly, a low wall of flame between Dante and Kane. In the chaos, Kane loosened his grip on Leo. Dante lunged, not at Kane, but at the boy, grabbing him and shoving him out of the office door to his waiting men. Enraged, Kane raised his pistol, ignoring the flames licking at his legs, and aimed it straight at Elara. "You bitch," he screamed. Dante saw it. The aim, the intent. There was no time to think. He threw himself in front of her. The gunshot was a deafening roar in the small space. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded in Dante's left shoulder. The force of the impact threw him back against Elara, and they both fell to the floor. The act of sacrifice, however, was the opening his team needed. Two of his men burst into the room through the smoke. Silas Kane, distracted and screaming as the fire caught his pants, was an easy target. The battle was over in a hail of gunfire. The shooting stopped. The only sounds were the crackle of the spreading fire and Dante's ragged breaths. "Dante!" Elara's scream was filled with terror. She scrambled to his side, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder, her palms instantly slick with blood. Leo was safe, being shielded by a guard at the door. Marco stood in the doorway, his face grim, his weapon still smoking. Dante was in agony, but as he looked up, his pain-filled eyes found Elara's. He saw not fear, but a fierce, desperate love. He reached up with his good hand, touching her cheek. "You're safe," he gasped. They had won. The Kanes were finished. The traitor was dead. They were all alive, but as Dante's world began to fade to black, he knew they had only survived because the woman he loved had been strong enough to save them all. Of course, this is the final chapter. 3 months later, sunlight warm, golden, and unfiltered, streamed through the panoramic windows of the penthouse. The monochrome fortress had been conquered by color. A vibrant kilim rug lay on the black marble floor. Bouquets of fresh flowers graced the minimalist tables, and stacks of art books were piled high in the corners. The air, once sterile and cold, now held the faint, pleasant scent of oil paints and brewing coffee. Elara sat on the plush sofa, a sketchbook open on her lap, idly drawing the smiling face of her brother. Leo, now healthy and brimming with a boyish energy she hadn't seen in years, was sprawled on the rug, fiercely focused on a video game. His successful surgery, paid for by Dante and performed by the best surgeon in the country, had been a miracle. His laughter, now a common sound in the unsessilent penthouse, was the sweetest music Elara had ever heard. The sound of soft footsteps made her look up. Dante walked into the room, his left arm no longer in a sling, though he still moved with a slight stiffness. A faint scar traced its way from his collarbone to his shoulder, a permanent reminder of the price of their victory. He paused, his eyes taking in the scene. A genuine, unguarded smile touched his lips, a sight that still made Elara's heart skip a beat. He came and sat beside her, his presence a familiar comfort. He leaned over and kissed her softly, his gaze then shifting to Leo. "He's beating my high score," Dante said, his voice a low grumble that held no real malice. "He's a 10-year-old boy with a bionic heart," Elara teased. "You're an old man, Volkov. Accept defeat." Dante chuckled, the sound warm and real. The change in him was the most profound transformation of all. The sovereign of Veridia's underworld still existed. He was as ruthless and powerful as ever in his business dealings. The Kane syndicate had been shattered, its remnants absorbed into his own empire, bringing a bloody, decisive end to the feud. But here, in this home they had built, he was just Dante. Elara's influence hadn't tamed him, but it had grounded him. She had given the king a reason to rule, not just for power, but for the peace of his kingdom. Later that afternoon, Marco stopped by. The tension that had existed between him and Dante in the final days of the hunt had vanished, replaced by a bond that was stronger than ever. Dante had apologized for his doubt, and Marco, with the quiet grace of a true brother, had simply clapped him on his good shoulder. Their loyalty had been tested by fire and had emerged as pure steel. That evening, after Leo had been picked up by a trusted driver to spend the night with a friend, a normal, childish activity that filled Elara with joy, she and Dante stood in the library. In the place of honor, above the fireplace, hung the restored painting of the coastline. It was perfect. The colors were vibrant, the light was luminous, and the scar that had once torn it in two was now an almost invisible seam, a testament to her patient, loving work. "It's the most valuable thing I own," Dante said, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. Elara leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's a reminder," she whispered, "that the most broken things can be made whole again," he finished for her, his voice rough with emotion. "That even in the dark, there's light. You taught me that." He turned her to face him, his gray eyes, once so cold, now filled with a deep, unwavering love. "You saved me, Elara, not just from a bullet. You saved me from the ghost I was becoming." "We saved each other," she replied, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. "You gave me a future. You gave Leo a future. You showed me that a man's strength isn't just in the power he wields, but in how he chooses to protect the people he loves." Later, they stood before the great window, looking out as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of crimson and gold that mirrored the painting in the other room. The lights of Veridia began to flicker on, a galaxy of promises spread out at their feet. This city, once a place of fear and struggle for her, was now theirs. "It's a dangerous world out there," she murmured, watching the endless flow of traffic below. Dante pulled her closer, his embrace a shield against the world. "Not for you," he vowed, his lips against her hair. Not anymore. He was her captor who had become her protector. She was his prisoner who had become his queen. Together, they looked out over their city, their hands intertwined, the sovereign and his artist, the shadow and the light, bound by a legacy of blood and reborn in the colors of love. They had found their dawn in Veridia, a future waiting to be painted.